Hi, I'm John Paul, and a really warm welcome back to my channel. What I wanted to talk about today was 5 things I wish I knew before I became a therapist. And it's not from the point of view of regressing anything, it's from the point of view of hopefully these are helpful to bear in mind sooner rather than later, I suppose. They're things that I would have realised over time, which, as I say, may have been helpful for me to have known earlier. Number one, I would say it's about the importance of personal development. On that point, I would have thought when I was doing my course, how am I going to learn how to stop somebody who's anxious being anxious? How would I learn how to work with somebody who's depressed? How do I help them alleviate their depression? Similarly with addictions or people being stuck in grief or whatever it is. But what I found through a lot of the training, which if you're on the training you'll probably be finding at the moment, is that what a lot of it consists of is kind of that experiential work. So we had evenings during the week, one evening a week, and then we would have 5 weekends a year throughout the course. And on those weekends there would be sort of an hour of some kind of lecture or training about subject matter, but then it would all be about being in a small group and working through material. Yes, we would do some visualizations, maybe, looking at internal masculine, internal feminine, life crisis, all those kind of things. But actually what most of it would be about was looking at our own internal processes, how we responded to someone else. If there was conflict in the group, what that would be like. If generally we were feeling stressed or pressured with the course or nervous, or those kind of things. That's what we would talk about more. Of course, therapy as well is a requirement for most courses as well. So that is, again, mapping the internal landscape. And the thing, therefore, that I would say about it all is when I was thinking, well, why aren't I learning this theory? And that did happen sometimes. There was some CBT, there were other things, of course. There was theory that is very important and can be used in relationship with clients. But what a lot of the training was about actually mapping my own internal landscape to get to know myself much better. And I think the point is that if you're working with clients, that's one of the most valuable things you can do, as well as learning the theory that might help, whatever Jung said, or Winnicott or Klein. But so importantly, have you done that work internally, or are certainly in the process of doing that? And by work, I mean, do you know what's enough for yourself, for example, where your boundaries are, how you communicate. I'm going to come on to talking about others in a minute, but how you manage your fear, what your anger feels like in your body, looking, as I've talked about in other videos, at that mind-body connection. What's your relationship with your body? If you're sitting with somebody who has body dysmorphia or a disconnected relationship with their body, what is yours like? Those things are going to become very important. Yes, people will come in with anxiety and talk about their anxiety, and therefore, how do you manage your own? What is your experience of that? If you're looking at general personality, what is actual authentic congruent personality for you and who you are, and what is perhaps something that's as a result of your wound or trauma from early experience, being able to distinguish between those. Because again, that's a really valuable thing to know when you're sitting with clients as well. There are all these things that we learn about ourselves, and I suppose it sounds quite self-centered when actually what we're talking about is being in relationship with another person and the benefits that will bring. But what I'm saying is that to be able to do that work yourself, to at the very least be sort of on that journey, be curious about it, is one of the most valuable things that you can do for clients. How do you regulate yourself? How do you relax? What is reward like in your life? How do you manage those different parts of yourself? As I've already said, in relation to the reward part, the drives, how do you know when's enough? How do you manage impulses, particularly, and it's specifically in relation, if you're looking as a therapist, about setting up your own practice, and I've just mentioned, how do you manage that fear part of yourself? It's going to be fear that puts people in reverse. It's going to be fear which has limiting behaviours that stops people doing things. Of course, we need helpful fear, but when it's unhelpful, it's very inhibiting and limiting for people. So how do you manage that part of yourself? I'm not suggesting with any of this that means that you need to have completed that work, of course, to the extent that it's ever complete in any human being. It's not about any therapist being some kind of perfect person, because there is no perfect person. Perfection is all in our minds. What it's about, I think, is being human and being aware of our own humanity, and having turned attention inwards, and I will talk about others as well, as I say in a minute, and really try to sort of map that landscape and work on those things that we might struggle with, and really, which is very important as well of working with a lot of people, to really have an awareness of the things that are of worth and value about us as well, because if you get somebody who comes in with low self-esteem, whatever that might mean to you, to have low self-esteem means that you can understand what it's like, and that's very important to be able to empathize with somebody. But we also need to know from kind of from thoughts, feelings, body, behavior point of view, perhaps also relationships with others, to some degree how we're going to move through that. And it's not, as I say, about completing that to the extent that's ever going to be completed. It's about being on that journey. Is one of the best ways to help people. What we want, I think, is a feeling of aliveness internally. Do you know what gives you meaning and purpose? Because that's often what people will be looking for. For example, it's going to look different to clients. Perhaps your ways of regulating yourself, your ways of relaxation, reward, taking care of yourself, even your boundaries might look different to clients. We are similar as we all are. We're also unique. But the point is to have gone through or be going through a process of doing that and mapping those things is the most valuable thing that we can do. So as I say, the real importance all the time of doing that work, and on an ongoing basis as well. And then the second thing that I would say is the importance of others and the significance of others. What most people will be talking about to a greater or lesser degree is either relationship with self or relationship with others, and often those two, they'll be covering both in sessions. Again, if you're looking at relationships with others, it's very important, I think, to be paying attention to your own relationships, your boundaries, the way you communicate, those sorts of things. What works for you in relationship, of course, is not necessarily going to be the same as your client. It's not a matter of having a frame that works for you that is going to be imposed on anybody. It's that actually your relationships externally, sort of outside of the therapy room, are they in the way that you would like them to be? Are you able to communicate with the people around you? Do you trust them? Are there a few people that you genuinely trust? Are there people that you can have total intimacy with, so to show all of your thoughts and feelings with them, and that that's going to be acceptable? That are the relationships you can sort of rest in terms of love? All those things are really key to be experiencing, at the very least, noticing and working on outside of the room, because you will start to notice, I think, if you're in the room talking about things like non-violent communication, for example, and helping somebody, to communicate better in order to get their needs met, how to vocalize, say, their anger in order to get their needs better met in relationship. You're really going to notice if what you then do is immediately go outside into personal relationships and have reactive anger and start swearing at your partner, that you'll start to feel that gap, I think. None of this, I hope, that's coming across is anything about therapists needing to be other than human beings. Of course, people lose their temper, people get angry, but what I think this is about is that, at the very least, to be noticing those things, for it to be important and serious to the therapist what their relationships are like, to be trying to make sure at times that their relationships are conscious and alive in the way that perhaps we're going to hope for our clients, and that our clients will be looking for too. And I just wanted to say something about therapy and other therapists as well, and the value of that. A lot of people who go into therapy training, make great friends with other therapists. Of course, like any situation, we're not going to like everybody. Everybody's not going to like us, even surrounded by a group of therapists. In fact, when I'm surrounded by a group of therapists, there can often be sort of conflict and things that come up, and people can be very open and honest about what's happening for them. I think for a lot of us, what we realise, some people's journey is perhaps to say less, but for quite a lot of people that go into therapy, they have learned to keep themselves safe by not saying very much. Actually, that was the way to keep safe as they were growing up. So there is something about that process of training where it is a matter of vocalizing, certainly, working out what we're feeling, and then feeling safe enough to communicate it to another person, or in a group, actually, very importantly, in a group as well. So that role of other therapists being a place where we can really try to something new, potentially, to sort of develop new ways of being with others, new way, how do we vocalize something if we have a difficulty with something, to best get our needs met, so that we say it in an empathetic and sensitive way. If there is a rupture that comes up, how do we repair that, rather than just sweeping it under the carpet or exploding? Those things, what therapy groups and those experiential groups, as I say, they give us the opportunity to be able to try new things in relationships and to orientate ourselves in relationships as well. So going back to what I wish I'd known, I suppose I didn't really have that context when I first started, when I didn't really realise why I would be spending a weekend with these people. What I mean is, I didn't really realise that actually a lot of this work is internal work, is looking at your own, having curiosity about yourself, how you relate to others, how others relate to you, how others experience you. Of course, it's not just about raising difficulties. We had an exercise where I trained, where at the end of things or the end of the course, they would do something called blooming, which is that everybody within a particular group, 10 people over the course of a few hours, would feed back to you all the great things that they experienced about you, because that can be something that people also don't grow up doing, I suppose, or experiencing in relationships. So again, I didn't quite connect that this was very valuable, as much as I enjoyed some of it or struggled with some of it, the direct application, I suppose, that it would have to working with clients. And it's sort of grappling with being curious about paying attention to all of the similar things that they will be throughout their lives. And for us to have gone through that process and be going through that process is perhaps one of the most valuable things that we can offer someone. Both from the point of view, as I say, of having worked through something, but also from the point of view of knowing how difficult it is. I did see something on Facebook where somebody was talking about their therapist, actually a new therapist, and they said that their therapist seemed to have a fragility, which suggested they'd gone through difficult experiences, but also were pretty sort of solid, stable, appeared to be strong. I'm not keen on the word strong in the context of emotion, because it implies that there's a weakness somewhere, which I'm not that keen on. However, what this client was saying, they described their therapist as having an earned strength. And I think that's the thing about all these processes, whether that's personal development work, therapy, this kind of group therapy, is that we go through things. The fact that we've been through things and have experienced them is absolutely one of the most important things from the point of view of experiencing empathy for the clients and the things that they'll be going through. And also, I think we need to have some sort of clarity in ourselves as to sort of an orientation of ourselves about how we see ourselves and how we experience the world and what works for us. As I say, it is not therefore imposing that onto clients, but it's saying that we are we're pretty sure-footed in our relationships. We're sure-footed internally. We know what we're standing on. And I think what we're looking at here is not any sort of perfection in terms of relationships. Again, same thing about relationship with self. There is no perfect way of being, doing, no perfect relationships. In terms of relationship with self, I think feeling alive, that sort of coming alive, knowing what you love, knowing what you want to go towards, knowing who you are. And in terms, again, of relationships, having relationships that are alive, where things are communicated, where things are worked through, to bring something to relationship, the power of that. And the great thing is, of course, as I'm saying, is to have lived experience of that, whether that's within the therapy groups that we have at college, or whether we also do that outside in our relationships and carry that on into our relationships outside of therapy as well. The other great thing about therapy training is it gives you a place, to tell your story, and in that way, often people find their tribe as well. And that the importance of telling your story, being able to tell your story, a therapy training environment is a safe place in which to do that. And similarly, for us to do that, for us to go through that, for us to feel the benefit of that, for us, shame dies where stories are told in safe places. Hopefully, these environments are safe and kept safe. We can have have an experience of what that's like, and therefore help our clients with that and try to facilitate that experience for our clients too, because that's what they'll be doing and we'll be wanting them to do, I guess, is to tell their stories, and particularly their stories where there's been difficulty or distress in the past. The third thing I would say is about, that I know now that I wouldn't have known before, is about the pervasiveness actually of the effect of being a therapist. I think I would have said at the beginning that, I was a lawyer before. There's a video about that and about my career change. I would have thought that what I'm going to do is replace doing that as a job with doing this as a job, which would be something I would enjoy more, was more intellectually interested in, and emotionally, that's what I would have had an awareness of that, would have felt good. The thing is, what I see though is the pervasiveness of it across life and how it's changed very significantly, how I see myself generally, and also how I see relationships in the world, not from the point of view of entirely changing personality, but it really does sweep across. I talked in my video about 5 great reasons for being a therapist, and in that I talk about the effect, the sort of beneficial effect actually of everything that you learn in the process of training, and also what you learn by being people's therapist and in supervision and talking to peer groups as well, and how that can be so valuable in relationships outside of therapy. Similarly, things that you learn in relationships outside of therapy can be helpful from the point of view of bringing that into the therapeutic relationship as well. So I've made clear in other videos the benefits of that, certainly, and how it isn't really possible, I don't think, to separate private and personal relationships. That's pervasive. The other thing, though, I can say is that can also bring up challenges too. If once you see something, for example, you can't unsee it. And if I give you an example of that, I talked in one of the other videos about Prince Harry and trauma, about how trauma isn't necessarily just the result, I say just, only the result of things that happen to people, which can be easy to remember and to recount. So things like physical violence or emotional abuse, very critical people, bullying, those things which we can clearly see and remember and recount and connect and understand would be traumatizing. Actually, another really important thing which I think can result in somebody being traumatized is having too little of something which is very important for too long. And in that situation, what I'm talking about particularly is too little connection, love, genuine, connected attachment. So a caregiver who's looking at you, really caring what you feel, paying attention to you, helping you work through your anger, your sadness, your love, your fear, really paying attention to your emotional world and helping you, as I say, to work through that and really feeding back who you are. Now, if those things aren't present, I think you're often people are left with a feeling unsafe and anxiety, and therefore sometimes a tendency to depression, or may turn to addictive behaviours and substances as well. But they will come into therapy potentially with a diagnosis of, say, anxiety, but not being sure exactly of why that is, because their upbringing seemed fine. People were there, people were taking practical care of them, they were in the room, they would ask them questions. What is often quite easy to miss is that something was lacking in that way, that attunement was lacking, that somebody genuinely paying attention to a particular aspect of you as well. It's not only that somebody cares about what's happening intellectually or those things, but are they also looking at that other very important part of you, your felt experience of the world and what's happening for you, and helping you through that. And if that wasn't happening, as I say, it is very difficult to notice. What happens, though, when you become aware of it, and that could have been through the therapy work or things that clients have said or reading or those types of things, you might start to notice, if that has been your experience in childhood, you may have got into a relationship with somebody as an adult who's very similar. So everything looks fine, happy, enjoyment, lots of shared values, but something that was missing is something that perhaps was always missing in your life, which is that somebody really seeing and hearing you, somebody really trying to attune to your felt experience. Instead, you might get a bit of somebody invalidating things, calling you sensitive or whatever. And if it's been familiar for you to be in relationship with that, that's just your normal, isn't it? But when you start to realise that, outside of the therapy room, you can't unsee it. And every time you see it, it will bring up a response, one thing which I've talked about in other videos, which I think is very important, and I mentioned in what I just said in number 1 about relationship with self, is really reconnecting mind and body and the importance of that. And one of the most important reasons for that, I think, is to be aware of what your emotional experience is. And often emotions are felt in the body. So to know when you're angry, very importantly, to know when you feel love, when you feel connection with another human being or with an activity or with a place. But of course, once that connection has been, you've been reconnected, whatever you pay your attention to grows. So if you pay your attention much more to what you feel, your feelings get stronger. And as I say, that will mean that if there are relationships outside of the therapy room where you're not getting needs met, where emotional needs are not getting met, I think you'll notice that more. Now, none of this means, therefore, relationships end and we're telling people they're fired, or it is that it might, though, require some sort of change to be made in the relationship, and therefore communicating our difficulty, distress, or just how we experience something in the way which has never happened before. And I'm just, those things are challenging, but also very important to do, of course. And to do that in your relationships outside of the room, again, is going to be very helpful for clients too. But just wanted to make the point that, the pervasiveness of it, the whole experience of training and working with clients, all the benefits and amazing things that come with that, and the things that could, at least in the short term, be challenging, which may of course come with amazing results, hopefully. But so that's the third one. The fourth one, I just wanted to mention frames. And I have said this in other videos as well. But this point about, what is, well, in two ways, what's your academic frame, but then also the importance of this orientating yourself and kind of your internal frame and how you navigate situations and relationships, including therapeutic relationships. The first one, if you're looking at the kind of academic frame, again, when I was going into therapy, training to be a therapist, I would have thought, well, it's an integrative course, but I will learn these psychoanalytic techniques, these existential ones, the CBT one, and then I will choose to put one of them potentially, or one of them would dominate, and that's what I would use when I'm working with clients. I think the thing that a lot of people experience over time is, of course, in order to, each of them will have things that are interesting. Perhaps for you, the entire psychoanalytic frame is the one that's for you and the one that you want to carry on working with as a therapist. But I think the key thing here is that your modality and what you form as far as your theory and that more academic intellectual side of it, that it should be something that resonates with you. You don't have to wholeheartedly take in and have to agree with every part of a particular type of therapy. You really can choose a modality of your own in some ways. I don't mean that from any sort of narcissistic or special way. I just mean that I think one of the most helpful things is to choose those parts from different bits that resonate with you, I guess, intellectually, that you find helpful in your own life as well. Similarly, those parts that make you come alive from an emotional point of view, from a feeling point of view, when you're talking about them, thinking about them, reading about them, hearing about them in relationship with others. And I often, that will happen over time. As I say, there are practical things that we have to put into essays. I don't mean this in any sort of mercenary way, but in order to pass projects and case studies and those kind of things, I think a really important journey is to be working out who you are from an academic intellectual way, your modality as a therapist, and that is absolutely an ongoing journey. As I say, pay attention to what's interesting to you intellectually, pay attention to what you feel when you're listening to something or reading about something, and really it will start to form from there. And then I think over time you will build on it, becomes more ornate over time. Because in addition to having this frame, what's really important is to have this sort of open system as well. So we have this frame, paradigm, however you look at it, which is how I guess we might see ourselves, the world, what we will bring into the therapy room. And the great thing about this career, well, we have to carry on with continuing professional development, but there is the opportunity all the time to add different bits to, even aspects of the frame might change. So important, to keep open, to keep interested, to keep curious as well. The other thing that's important to say, I think, about that, the frame and the intellectual academic side of things too, is that actually in my experience, most of what we talk about in supervision, most of what's brought to supervision, a lot of what happens between therapists and clients is really about things other than the kind of academic intellectual side of things. I'm not diminishing that in any way. It's of enormous value. I think it helps us to feel safe. Well, it's not just about that. There are amazing things that we can learn, how to communicate, how to understand ourselves and others, which are very helpful for clients. Also, there's a lot of things that happen about the relationship, whether that's about holding boundaries. If somebody asks you, where did you go on holiday? Are you married? All sorts of things. Most of the stuff I think that takes up people's therapist thinking time is more around the relationship, and from that point of view there isn't actually theory for that. And that takes me back to number one, and the importance of knowing yourself and trusting yourself. Having an intellect that you can trust, having a body that you can trust. What I mean by that is your emotional experience, being able to really trust that. As well, of course, bring in other people and be informed by other people's opinions too. But this work that I was talking about in one, about being familiar with yourself, knowing yourself, being able to, as I say, trust what you feel, because that's what you're going to be relying on a lot of the time. There are plenty of therapists who ask a lot of people about things when they find it difficult, maybe because they're more extroverted. It may also be because they don't necessarily trust themselves that much. Also, there are plenty of therapists probably who don't ask other therapists about things, and that might be because they've got used to being incredibly self-reliant, and perhaps they could do with being informed by others and asking other people's opinions too. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that when I say trusting your body, if somebody has anxiety, for example, or chronic anger or annoyance, actually the messages that are coming from the body are, you might say, at times are going to be untrustworthy. So that again goes back to doing that work about managing your own fear to make sure that you can occupy your body, that you can take those messages, and if you do perhaps feel anxious about something or annoyed, that you can take those messages and work out why. Because, as I say, what's going to happen most of the time is there are things that just don't have a right or wrong answer. If I give a few examples about that there are therapists I will talk to who tell me about all the correspondence that's going backwards and forwards between them and clients. From my point of view, I would never do anything in a text with somebody other than make an arrangement or change an arrangement. But there are plenty of therapists, or there are therapists out there who will, somebody says to them, a client says this happened during a session, I found that difficult, they will talk to them about it by text. There's no right or wrong to it. I mean, there's issues around boundaries, but the point is that somebody else will have their opinion. But you need to, I think, feel safe in yourself, be able to trust yourself so that you can make those decisions. Of course, as I say, be informed by other people's opinions as well, but fundamentally to be able to trust how you navigate it. And in order to do that, I think it's very helpful as well, if you're looking at two and relationships with others outside of the therapy room, that you're able to trust yourself in relationships out there. And if you do, if you're able to navigate them, I think it also makes relationships, that ability to navigate them within the therapy room as well. I mean, again, just an example of this sort of no particular right or wrong to anything, but how things can be so different. When I was looking at another Facebook group recently, I don't spend that much time on these Facebook groups, by the way, but somebody said that they talked about a client ending, and one therapist posted under there that I think some clients really need you to fight for them if they're ending. And, I can really see that. I can see that for a certain type of personality, as I say, that real self-regulators have always taken care of themselves, who don't really trust and rely on relationships, for a therapist to say, if they're feeling like, well, I'm not sure, or there's been a rupture or something which means they want to leave, for a therapist to say, oh, I think you should stay, that could be a very healing process. Personally, if a client is saying that they want to end, I sort of respect their agency. I'm not suggesting that therapist I'm talking about isn't respecting their agency, but I think, well, if that is something that's come forward from a client, they may come back again at some point in the future. This isn't perhaps the time, or this has been the time for that part of the work, and then there'll be a time at another part, potentially for another part of the work, or they'll go to another therapist and do that work with them, or they'll do that work in another way outside of therapy. Either way, you can see that one person says make it very clear that somebody should stay, in the therapist's opinion. Another person will say, okay, let's work to an ending. Which is right, which is wrong? There isn't a right or wrong, I don't think. And therefore, as I say, I keep making the point, but it's about, number one, being able to trust yourself, knowing that you're comfortable in the decisions and opinions that you have. And they're going to be different with different clients, and they might change over time, but how important that is really, and how that should be as a result of sort of ongoing work and reflection, and whenever, of course, brought to a relationship with other people as well. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is this issue about vicarious trauma, which I might get asked about quite a lot, which is, and therapists do mention quite a lot, which is this point that because we hear so many difficult things and distressing memories, that is there some sort of trauma that therapists experience? And I would read and hear about a number of therapists who do experience that. The thing that I would say about it, it wasn't actually something I would ever have particularly worried about at the beginning, I don't think, and I wouldn't say from a personal point of view that it is something to be concerned about. And the reason for that is, although absolutely there are things that I remember that people told me years ago, memories that were so, I guess, traumatizing, so shocking, that sometime would still come into my mind. The point of therapy, of course, is not that this memory is delivered statically and then that's that. The whole point of therapy and the whole thing about relationship is that something is brought to relationship, and when it is, that it changes. That doesn't mean that anybody looks back at whatever the traumatizing experience was and laughs about it at all, but it is that once something is brought, it tends to be processed. You can, look at what somebody believed about themselves at the time, the effect that it had on them, how it affected their experience of themselves and the world. And often people will close those kind of difficult experiences in early childhood in a way where they blame themselves. So the amazing thing about reopening them in a controlled and careful way in therapy is that people can realise the sort of beliefs that they've developed, which may be unhelpful and limiting to them, about trust of self and their own power, or of course trust of others, and then replace them with something which is more helpful. So it isn't that, as I say, these are static memories and nothing happens to them. Therapists are not sort of grief trolling, listening to gossip. Something is dynamic happens in relationship if, of course, the relationship is in a place where it is co-regulating. Of course, it's not only the therapist's thoughts, feelings, body in terms of, and behaviour in terms of the presence in the room that's working with these memories and helping with the process. The client's psyche will be doing that as well. Of course it will. The client, fundamentally, if somebody's coming to therapy, they want to move from the place where they are at the moment. So you have two people who are both working with whatever it is that's happened in order for something to transform. And I think that as long as the therapeutic relationship is working the way that it should, and in that way I'd go back to put the personal work and the relationship work that you'll be doing generally, then I think that is what's happened. So it isn't that we're left with these memories. In fact, it is a really rewarding experience to see those kinds of changes. Of course, it's rewarding for the client to shift perspective about themselves and about the world in a way that's going to, or could, profoundly improve their quality of life. And that is very rewarding from a personal point of view for the therapist as well. And from that point of view, I would say, it might sound strange to say that I enjoy what I do, because people will often say to me, I don't know how you do what you do. Well, the thing that I've just said is actually there is something which is hugely rewarding about that experience. It is what happens to people's distress and difficulties once it's brought into a therapeutic relationship where the right kind of conditions are present. So I just wanted to finish off by saying, really, we can enjoy it and say we enjoy it as a job. And of course, I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't enjoy it. Yes, there are challenges to it. I've talked about that in another video about the challenges of being a therapist. There's a few more that I may have mentioned here. But enjoyment is important. Laughter is a part of therapy. What we don't want, of course, which can often be the case, and it's important to notice, is that laughter, humour can be used to avoid. difficulties and distress. But once that's recognized, and once we've moved through that, and once these things have been looked at, these difficult experiences with the seriousness and the significance and the importance that they deserve, and they do change, in the context of that connection between therapist and client, then there's also fun. Part of connection and a connected relationship at times is to laugh at things and enjoy it, and for the relationship to feel good as well. And that is also, I think, very much a part of the day-to-day life of a therapist too. Okay, so that's the 5 things I wanted to say. Actually, when I was thinking about it, I came up with 20. So it may be that I do some more. I hope, though, that these have been helpful. If they have, as ever, if you could tap a like on the video. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, it would be great if you would do that. If you want to leave any comments at all below the video, please do, and I shall respond to them. If you would prefer to contact me directly via my website, via email, then details of that are on the bio, the channel description as well. Thank you for listening, and I shall see you soon.